Dungeons, the meat of every The Legend of Zelda game, and what made a Zelda game until Breath of the Wild entered the stage and replaced the greatest Zelda staple with 4 divine beasts and 120 Sheikah shrines in its main game. But what about the sequel? Are dungeons and conventions that had to go away permanently according to the Zelda team in Breath of the Wild and its sequel? Or has the overwhelming feedback of dungeons being superior to divine beasts been noted by Onuma-san and Fujibayashi-san and will result in new dungeons in Zelda Breath of the Wild 2? Be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and press that notification bell as together with Monster Maze, we go over the dangerous situation we are in, the way dungeons could make the sequel a far better game than the original, how to spread them out across the map, and what type of dungeons, and more importantly dungeon interiors, we should hope for inside Breath of the Wild 2.
We are at a crossroad for the Zelda franchise, which has gone from being the dungeon experience to the open-air experience in the gaming industry. But why can't we have both? You know, the ultimate Zelda experience. One that finally learns from the mistakes of the past, but also doesn't cut out its crown jewels, which were the highlight and the most memorable locations of each past Zelda game. 3D dungeons/temples. Massive structures filled with objects like a map, compass, locked doors, keys to these, plenty of enemies and puzzles, mini-bosses, specific dungeon items, a boss key leading to the boss chamber, and finally a unique boss from the last dungeon. The Divine Beast only had a map, the Divine Beast mechanical puzzle, terminals or, if you prefer, progressive points, and then the boss, which was a Malice Blight recycled 4 times. Breath of the Wild's Divine Beasts barely qualified as dungeons, as they were oversimplified to a degree where they felt like the last third of a traditional 3D Zelda dungeon. After defeating the mini-boss, claiming the dungeon item, and beginning the push for the boss chamber in Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, The Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword. In fact, if you combine all these 4 Divine Beasts together, then you barely have an Ancient Cistern, Arbutus Ground, Stone Tower Temple, or Forest Temple.
So where did the remaining 2/3 go? The 120 Sheikah shrines. There we find the chamber level design, and in some of them even locked doors and keys. The Zelda team simply took the incredible dungeon formula of 5 or 6 dungeons in each game and partitioned it among overworld puzzles like shrine quests, interiors of Sheikah shrines, and divine beasts. It may have gone something like this. Dungeon mini-bosses and enemies, you are going to the overworld. Locked doors and keys to these are going to the more complicated shrines, and the final push for the boss key and the boss go to the divine beasts. All 3 get the puzzles though, but only the open air gets the variety of different surfaces. The result was the most mediocre dungeon experience across all 3D Zelda games, and even most 2D Zelda games, and where none of the divine beasts stood out enough to be close to the best dungeons in the series. Which is a shame, as Breath of the Wild could have been so much more with proper dungeons, which represented each of the races living in Hyrule. But you know what? I am not mad that we got the Divine Beasts and the Hero Trial Sheikah Shrines, as they served their purpose well, but now it will be such a waste to do the same with the so-called Farron Barbarians or Zonai. After all, Link is already the hero of Hyrule, he just needs to wear the green hero set of the wild, like all the heroes before him.
But we don't want exclusively green or dark underground Zonai dungeons and mini-dungeons, with no variety to their atmospheres and interiors other than going from an ancient Sheikah to a distant past Farron theme. But for real, would the Zelda team make this mistake twice, taking out the identity of a dungeon and then replacing it with rinse and repeat? That would be a clear downgrade, as historically 3D Zelda dungeons just got better and better with each entry in the series, until peaking in Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword. Heck, even the trial chambers found in the Trial of the Sword had forests, lava, winter, and so on themes, which made them feel more varied and unique than all of the Divine Beasts and Sheikah shrines combined, granting an overall more organic Sheikah experience that didn't exist in the main game, minus the overworld puzzle shrine quests obviously. And Breath of the Wild sequel could bring the minecart back on track by distancing itself from the original in a greatly superior way, by bringing back dungeons with all its features tied to the specific races found in each province. Since Hyrule is divided into 8 provinces, why not give each of these a dungeon on top of the 3 underground temples, bringing the total amount of dungeons to 11 or perhaps even 12. A perfect number for a world that's being reused, and a new underground section which could easily be achieved by reducing the number of mini dungeons from 120 to 75 or even 60.
Giving us the best of both worlds. Breath of the Wild's divine beasts and the jaw-dropping dungeons found in past 3D Zelda games. A puzzle experience that just gets better and better the further you get into the game, as reusing the open air has granted plenty of time and manpower to set a new precedent for dungeon quality throughout the entire game, standing as a complete contrast to Breath of the Wild. And if we already have a feeling of repetition and dullness of the 4 divine beasts, then imagine 8 or 10 Zonai temples. Hence, why it is preferable to not bound one design to them, but all of Hyrule's diverse and rich cultures. In other words, take the variety of the open air provinces and apply those to dungeons.
The result will be a better experience even before adding new provinces to the game, and combine this with other mini dungeons spread across the world, and you have the recipe for a perfect Zelda open air X dungeon mix. Now, as promised, let's go over the spread of the dungeons, which, as we brought up earlier, should utilize all 8 provinces of Hyrule. This way, each race will have at least one dungeon representing them, and contributes in fully bringing back the magic of Zelda dungeons to the franchise. You would then have a Zonai dungeon in Faron, a Korok dungeon in Great Hyrule's Forest in central Hyrule, a Zora underwater dungeon in the depths of Lanayru that rivals the Ancient Cistern, a Goron volcano lava dungeon which takes full advantage of the minecart mechanic and physics found in Breath of the Wild, and a Rito Paradise, or Hell if you prefer, made of wind and ice.
Then we have Gerudo and Sheikah in the Cluda dungeons. 2 clearly Asian-inspired tribes and provinces, only where the Gerudo represents the far west of Asia and the Sheikah the far east. Interestingly enough, so far we have not seen dungeons representing the 2 cultures in the one and same Zelda game, that being Arabic and Japanese, which Breath of the Wild sequel could change in an incredible way. A Middle Eastern maze of a town or a palace, and Japanese temple, or possibly in addition to a hidden samurai Sheikah or Yiga castle where we climb up floor after floor until reaching the boss, which would be in accordance with the development experiment, where the Zelda team put Breath of the Wild Link in Himeji Castle and dropped him from the sky above the Imperial Palace of Kyoto and Nijo Castle.
And since we are on the topic of castles, obviously Hyrule Castle under Ganondorf's reign this time, wherever it lands and if it indeed lifts up from its current location. By turning Hyrule Castle's non-linear nature into a proper new type of Zelda dungeon, we have the perfect blend of dungeons in any Zelda game, and which will be able to shine so bright that we forget that we are still in the same Hyrule. That alone would be more than enough to restore the Zelda magic that many veterans missed in Breath of the Wild, and which newcomers were unaware of, but will most likely greatly enjoy.
Combine this with the battle against Malice, possible partner gameplay akin to Medley and Maka in the Wind Waker, and the transformation mask in Majora's Mask, all aim to enhance the experience further, as Link might gain new powers, arm abilities as illustrated by the free-eyed Yezen on Reddit, and these could be tied to each dungeon, making him more and more versatile and preferable to play the further you get into the game. That is if Princess Zelda is playable. And say that in this case she might feel as a better character to play at first due to, say, a potential initial handicap to Link's right arm, making him incapable of wielding and completing certain actions until he's able to obtain these abilities and to a much better degree in dungeons later on in the game. If Link and Zelda will adventure together as concepted by the free-eyed Yezen, then I could totally see Zelink entering dungeons and solving puzzles together, progressing through these dungeons with short-haired Princess Zelda in an even better way than we did with Medley and Maka in the Wind Waker.
In other words, so much that could grant a better sequel, but it would be lost if the Zelda team doesn't listen to feedback. With that said, do we have any indications or teases that dungeons in the new 3D Zelda games are not dead? I mean, who's to say that classic Zelda dungeons aren't a thing of the past and this new micro-dungeon concept is the way to go for the Zelda team? For that, be sure to head over to my channel in the end card, where we will discuss specific hints, comments and details that the Zelda team might be returning to form sometime soon. So be sure to go check it out.
But before you do so, be sure to press that like button and share this video. Subscribe to the Commonwealth Realm and Monster Maze, and press that notification bell and again for all notifications to not miss any videos like this one. Also, I've launched a new Discord since the old one was pretty dead at this point, which is going to focus far more on Zelda theory discussions, Nintendo Switch discussions, and that's pretty much it, keeping it simple in other words. But I also need to give a big thanks to all our patreon.com/commonrealm patrons, and in particular, royal producer Charles Shash. But now, be sure to check out Monster May's part of this collab.